Okay, everybody, I'm not going to be here. You're not going to be tired of me anymore. I just wanted to welcome the next super panel, and thank you for staying with us. I wanted to just introduce the moderator of the next panel and get down. The next panel is going to talk about how to make sense of it all from a business point of view and what the future will mean from a business point of view. To lead this great panel, I want to invite Ingrid Silver, who is SNR Denton, a big law firm, and she's a mobile expert. She does a lot of rights and licensing deals in the telecom and media industry. So she kindly agreed to take this over from me and liven it up. Thank you to the panelists as well. Ingrid will introduce, and then we'll see you all up there at 6:30 on the 5th floor for drinks, because I wanted to meet you guys. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Oops. Right, can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, thanks very much, Ferhan, for that introduction. Welcome to this last session for the day, which is, can rich media apps deliver significant digital revenues? So this afternoon has been all about apps and iPads and things like that. And it started off with lots of fun with people demoing games and having little competitions. And we even had a little sing-along session for those of you who missed it. And then the day got gradually more serious as we looked at business models and deployment and so on. And this is the really grown-up session of the day where we talk about where the money is going to be. So we have a fantastic panel here with us for this session. We're going to introduce them later on. But what I thought would be very helpful to kick off this session is to start off by setting the scene. So Michael Schneider has very kindly agreed to give us a little presentation with an overview of the current state of the market. So Michael, I'm going to hand over to you if that's all right. While Michael is heading over to the podium, can I have a quick show of hands from the audience? Who at this point in time thinks that rich media apps can deliver significant digital revenues? I can't see, it's a bit dark out there, you've got to wave.
It's about half.
Okay, good, excellent. We'll see where we get to by the end of the session. Michael, over to you.
All right, thank you. So I'm Michael Schneider, I'm the CEO of Mobile Roadie. We're a platform that lets anyone quickly and easily make a mobile app. I've been around for a year and a half. There's been about 1,000 apps complete on our platform, so that's why I'm here today. So to really illustrate the growth of mobile, I want to start off with this picture. Barack Obama was inaugurated in January of 2009, and when he was inaugurated, there were 4.2 billion mobile phone users in the world. You fast forward 18 months, he's got some gray hair there, he doesn't look so happy, and there's 5 billion mobile phone users. So in the span of 18 months, we went from 4.2 billion to 5 billion, about a 20% increase. It's just totally explosive what's going on in this industry. Quick overview of mobile today. So there's about 5 billion users that I just mentioned, about 120 million iOS. That includes iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch. The iPad has just been an unbelievable success, and I'm going to focus more on tablets in a little bit. 2 million in the first few months. That's 1 every 3 seconds at launch. iPhone users are incredibly active, and I'll give you more specifics, but basically they love apps, and they're spending over half an hour a day in apps. It's a huge amount of time to just be spending staring at their phone inside an application. Google's selling 200,000 Android devices a day. Android is the competitor to iPhone, made by Google, and that's up from 100,000 6 months ago. So the growth is just incredible. And by 2013, personally, I think it's going to happen sooner. It's estimated that more people will access the web from a mobile device than from a computer. To put it a different way, there's 4 people born every second on the planet, and there's 39 mobile phones sold every second.
It's easier to sell a phone than to give birth.
Apparently. It takes less time, I guess. So let's talk about mobile. What does mobile even mean anymore? Traditionally, mobile has meant a phone or a laptop. Now a tablet is mobile. Apple has really opened this market. But take a look at this. That's in a car. That's in a Ford car, and Ford has just announced an app ecosystem for their cars. So now developers can develop apps that you can use, hopefully not while you're driving, but in the car to make your life easier. And that's just one example of all these different ways that mobile is going in non-traditional places. This graph shows the growth of web usage on mobile devices all over the world. The different colors represent different regions of the world. I just want to illustrate how explosive and how quickly it's growing. I wanted to give you a breakdown of the 4 major players, Nokia, BlackBerry, iPhone, and Android. And globally, Nokia is well ahead. But in North America, it's an iPhone and Android world. Nokia is almost non-existent. Here in Europe, this graph says that it's about the same as iPhone. But I gave a presentation in France last week, and I took a poll of the audience, and there were about 2 Nokia users and about 150 iPhone users. So maybe it depends on the demographic. Asia is still very much a Nokia world. But take a look at the engagement numbers. On the left, that's Nokia right there, so about 44% globally market share. But they only represent 24% of app traffic. Android, on the other hand, Google's operating system, is 10% global market share, but they have over a quarter of the total usage of apps. So even though they're far less percentage in market share, their users are much more active and they're going into apps. If you look at Apple, it's off the charts, 15% global market share, 40% app usage. So talking specifically about tablets, I wanted to give you a breakdown of what's available today and what's vaporware, meaning it's not available today, maybe it's coming soon, it's been announced, we're not sure what's going on. Available today, major players like Dell, Samsung, Arcos, HP, and Apple, and a company called Juju. And then the vaporware ones are the government of India, LG, BlackBerry, HTC, and Norton Inc. So starting with Dell, you have a tablet called the Dell Streak that's out now. A little more expensive than the iPad. It runs Android. For those of you that read TechCrunch or follow tech blogs, this was the CrunchPad that Mike Arrington was so upset about and filed a lawsuit over. So you can look that up if you're curious about it. But it's about the same price as an iPad. It runs the Linux operating system. Arcos has both an Android and a Windows Mobile Play. So they're trying to see, I think, which one wins. You'll notice that the Windows Mobile is about double the price of Android. Samsung, I heard this come up in the last panel, is releasing this really beautiful tablet called the Galaxy Tab. The only challenge is it's almost double the cost of the iPad. And so as beautiful and slick as it is, I think it's going to be a tough sell. It runs Android. LG has announced something called the Optimus. It's rumored to be around 500 euros. There's no exact pricing or street date yet. It runs Android. Norton Inc. is working on a simple tablet called Atom. It's supposed to be really inexpensive, but the pricing is not known yet. HTC is the largest manufacturer of Android phones in the world. And so they're rumored to be working on a tablet. I'm pretty sure they are. And when it hits, it's going to be massive. It will undoubtedly run Android, but not much is known about it to date. HP announced something called the Slate. This was supposed to run Windows Mobile, but then they bought Palm in the meantime. So now nobody knows if it's going to be Windows Mobile or Palm. It's rumored to be around $500. Here's the government of India. So this is really fascinating. The Indian government has developed a tablet. And they're highly subsidizing it. So it's going to be around $30–40. And their goal is to, in a lot of ways, lift the young population, give them a tool in schools to learn, replace textbooks possibly. And it's a fascinating trend. The government is now creating tablets. RIM just announced the playbook last week. It looks really pretty. We'll see what happens. There's no street date yet or price. And the iPad. I saved the iPad for last just because it's so important and massive in the tablet industry. It was $2 billion in sales last quarter for Apple. They own 84% of the market worldwide. And users are really happy. 84% market share, and of these users, about 90% are happy with their purchase. To put it another way, I'm not sure that any of these other tablets today matter that much. And if you're looking today to do something, the iPad is the choice. This will change over time, of course, as competition comes into play, but they have a massive, massive lead. So here are a few stats on, we're talking about money and monetization. Rich video ads on the iPad have a 10 times higher click-through rate than the same ad on an iPhone. What that tells us is because of the big screen, the same ad has a much higher effective rates for the audience. Games are huge. They have about a 20% market share in the total app ecosystem on the iPad. iPad users have a 3 times higher usage time in the same game as the iPhone. That's really fascinating. Again, the same exact game, just a bigger screen makes a huge difference in terms of engagement. And probably most interestingly for us, there's a 5-time higher CPM, cost per thousand for ads, on the iPad than the iPhone. So there's a lot more money here. This is a projection by iSupply of unit shipments of tablets over the next 3 years. And so Apple has about 75–80% of the market today. But by 2012, with all these competitors and all those devices I just showed you, it's estimated to slip to about 60–65%. So because of the lead they have and because of how good their product is, it's really going to be tough to beat. So here are a few business models that I think work well on tablets. Starting with digital content sales, this is the obvious one. iTunes, Netflix in the US, where you can instantly watch a movie and purchase it. Kindle, ebooks. Anything that you have that's already digitized, you have a fantastic opportunity because someone's already on a digital device connected to the internet to sell it. Sponsorship. This is a mobile Roadie app. This is our Miami Dolphins app. And right there you see the AT&T logo. That's their main sponsor there. So there's a great opportunity to sell sponsors and upsell them on exposure in your app. Advertising. As we just talked about, there's a huge opportunity, and users are much more engaged, and rates are much higher. And you really have an opportunity, because of the big screen, for very rich media engaging ads on the iPad. Paywalls. I put this in. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of paywalls. Rupert Murdoch recently sort of declared war on the free internet and decided to put all of his content behind paywalls. But maybe it's going to work. So what the Wall Street Journal does is they offer some content for free. And then other stories, perhaps the good stuff with video and photo and rich media, you have to pay for. It remains to be seen. But it might be a viable business model on tablets. And games. Games are massive money makers, especially on tablets. Monopoly, one of the most famous games in the world, has made millions and millions of dollars on both the iPhone and iPad. And again, with those engagement numbers of users spending more time because of the big screen, games are definitely very effective on tablets. So to sum it all up, next year it's estimated that there will be 50 million tablets sold. So this is a real market with real numbers. And that's it. If you want a copy of this presentation, there's a link right there. My contact information is there. And thank you.
Well, Michael, let's just keep you there for a couple of seconds, if that's OK. I don't know if anyone has any questions at this stage. There will be time for Q&A at the end. But if I could just ask a couple of questions.
Put the link up again for me.
Yeah. Where can we find you? Put them back. Just that Wall Street example, in one of the earlier sessions today, someone from the newspaper industry, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about this effectively being an electronic piece of paper. Do you think that's a fair analogy in your mind, at least for the print industry?
I think it's better than a piece of paper. I mean, it has the same content as a piece of paper. But I can see a photo, and now I can click and read more about it.
But do you see it as a natural substitution and natural progression for that market, or do you think it will sit alongside? Well,
personally, I do. I made a statement that caused a lot of controversy at a publishers conference a few weeks ago that said, I think the physical book will be dead within 5 years. Dead not meaning there will be no more physical books in the world, but dead meaning that most people will consume, just like CDs today, you don't really buy a CD anymore, most people will consume book content digitally. So I think the writing's on the wall. It's a matter of if you want to go there with your business, or you can choose to ignore it and wait, but no matter what, it's coming, and we have to make a decision.
And one of the earlier learnings that came out of one of the earlier sessions is that, yes, we have these tablets appearing on the market, but we're not really seeing any or a significant number of apps being developed for that environment. It just seems to be a transition from the smartphone environment into the larger screen. Is that consistent with your observations so far?
Not really. I mean, we're in the apps business, and we see a ton of volume, and my competitors see volume too. But I think what apps offer over just the mobile web is user experience.
Right, but do you see the tablet as a separate environment, if you like, to the smartphone, which is more about mobility and the personal device in your pocket rather than in your lounge? And
yeah, sure, a little bit. I mean, phones are a lot cheaper, they're a lot more accessible. Tablets are more expensive right now. But, so yeah, a little bit, to answer your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, well, let's Right. So what we take away from Michael's presentation is that there's massive growth, also a certain degree of fragmentation and complexity in the ecosystem as it's currently evolving. So what I'd like to do now is sort of involve the rest of our panel to sort of talk about how you're engaging with this new ecosystem as it evolves. And to do that, what I'd like you to each do is start off by introducing yourself and the organisation you represent, and tell us a little bit about how you're engaging with this environment. So starting with you, Hemant.
Good evening. So my name is Hemant. I'm heading developer marketing in Vodafone Group, responsible for content activities within the Vodafone shop, within the Vodafone portals. So fragmentation is a reality today, and most of the discussion Michael had was about iPads and tablets. But I think the point we are also looking at a trend is that the smartphone penetration is going deeper as the price points are coming down. So there's a lot more engaged users who are out there. Granted that the share of engagement may be lesser on other platforms, but in absolute numbers, that's much more than the 2 million iPads which are out there. So the opportunity of rich content distribution is not limited to the iPad. It is also a much bigger opportunity in the smartphone areas overall. And as soon as you enter that space, you obviously enter the fragmentation space. There's multiple platforms out there which do contribute to cost elements of building, but there's still viable returns from those platforms as well.
And so as an operator, how do you participate in this environment? What is your role?
So from an operator perspective, the one role obviously is to have the portals and shop. So Vodafone has its own application shop as well on the smartphone areas. We've just launched on the Android a Vodafone shop about 3 months ago.
Sorry, so Vodafone has a shop in different app stores, but you also have your own...
Yes, so Vodafone does distribute content in other app stores, but also has its own app store for the customized handsets which sell in the Vodafone channel. We pre-install a Vodafone shop on it. On the Android devices is where we started doing that about 3 months ago. And we're coming out of the Nokia devices soon, and followed by the RIM at some point in the early next year. So, but on the other devices, we have the mobile web portal, which is still a viable platform for consumers to come and access content from. Obviously, in the smartphone arena, we find the consumers are more engaged and more inclined to go to an app store environment to get access to content. But as soon as you hit the mid-range devices and the low-end devices, the web portal is still a viable distribution system for them. So from an operator perspective, one is obviously to get these access points for the consumer out, and the other is to then work with content providers and developers to get content into the store. So as an example, in the Vodafone shop, any Android developer can come and submit an application, which we will distribute and give the developer a 70% revenue share.
And effectively, your Vodafone shop is competing with things like the iPhone App Store and that sort of... So in a way, you're competing to attract apps to your environment as opposed to those ones? Is that...
Well, iPhone is a closed environment, so that's out of question. But on the Android case, yes, we do coexist with the Google market. But in the devices which are selling in the Vodafone channel, the Vodafone shop is on the home screen. It's slightly better placement, but the other key aspect of the Vodafone shop obviously is the operator billing, which generates a lot more conversion rates because it's still the most convenient way to charge. And also the fact that being an operator, we understand the consumer's behavior in the portals a lot better because we have access to that data, obviously. And we are able to churn that into the recommendation engine and serve up a lot of relevant content. Today, from a very limited period of time, what we find is that from the recommended content, using the recommendation engines, we are able to generate 4 times more downloads than simply placements in a static promotion portal.
Right, so I guess from an operator point of view, you feel that you add certain insights, and also strategically you already have that billing relationship with the consumer.
Exactly.
How closely do you collaborate, and then we'll move on to the next panelist, but how closely do you collaborate with apps publishers in terms of how they present themselves within your environment or the prominence you give them?
Well, Vodafone Live, for example, which has been the portal earlier, has been there for about 8 years now and has generated significant revenues in content distribution. The whole industry is moving towards an app store kind of an environment, especially in the smartphone area, and that's relatively new activity from Vodafone, so I don't have numbers to share yet since it's only been about 3 months. But in terms of collaboration, we obviously, because of the Vodafone Live activities, we do have existing content provider relationships with most of the major publishers and now on the apps front specifically, opening up the system for anyone to go and publish an app is a new learning from an operator perspective as well. Previously, operators were much more stringent with what goes on the portals, and slowly we're opening up our portals to allow access as distribution.
Interesting, thank you. Sonnia, tell us a little bit about Disney and how they view this whole environment.
I will. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I'm Sonnia Park-Dionisio. I represent the Walt Disney Company. I'm actually part of the digital media distribution team. My role there is to head up the account management and marketing area, and I manage our key accounts such as iTunes, Sony, and Xbox at a regional level for Europe. We look at the app space as a very interesting and dynamic space. Disney has a lot of content already on the stores, not just iTunes, but across the other app stores. So for example, with Vodafone, we have our content live with Vodafone as well. And what we're seeing is that I think with the app space, it really depends on what people want to achieve and what consumers want. So for Disney, it's all about engaging with the consumer, creating great content that the consumers want to engage with, and actually giving them the chance to control how they interact with it. So I think our Toy Story 3 app that was discussed earlier this afternoon showed a parent could record their own voice for reading the story, and that's kind of the elements we try to bring in, because we think these platforms really allow for that to happen. I think more on the commercial side as a company, we look at these platforms and the apps, and we look at it from a variety of angles, whether it's from effectively marketing to a commercial or to a hybrid. So I think like many companies who are putting apps out there, those are the things that we always are looking at and defining continually.
And John, tell us about Sky and how Sky views this whole space.
Sure, so can you hear me, hopefully? I'm John Jelley, and I do digital strategy and development for Sky News. So the story from Sky's point of view with mobile and tablet apps is that, we're a big satellite subscriber business. So our key motive is always to try and give value to our subscribers. So when we launched our iPhone app a couple of years ago, we're very pleased that now it's got essentially 2 million downloads and about 700,000 weekly users, and a lot of those are our subscribers. So a lot of what the app business is about for us is about getting our content to kind of the news consumers who are consuming us on many platforms, on HD, on SD, online. Looking forward, I think it's actually much more exciting, because at the moment our very successful iPhone app just essentially pulls the latest information from our website. It does it very effectively. It's a very simple app. But as we look at the tablet market, we actually see that there's a whole bunch of opportunities in terms of editorial and creative opportunities to not just use existing content, but actually create new forms of content that are optimized for a touchscreen device. So where we see it is that this is not only a way of getting much more rich media onto these platforms that are absolutely perfectly suited to them, but also it's about as a TV producer, and I'm sure there are lots of TV producers in this room, one of the things you're most excited about is creating consistent, highly produced experiences. And for us, apps are a brilliant way of doing that. The web, for many people, including, I'm sure anyone's experience of the web is actually quite a lot of the time frustration at the number of pop-ups, frustration at the number of pages, at the proliferation of material. So, as a producer of news, what we're interested in doing is saying, here are lots of interesting, rich and interactive ways of consuming content. So the iPad app, which we're going to launch in the first half of next year, will be video and graphics based in a way that actually no news apps, I know this is a very news perspective here, but news apps and actually a lot of other apps are quite focused on taking feeds of existing content. And I think that's not sufficient for these new platforms and the opportunities they give.
It's interesting because the four of you have given quite upbeat, positive feedback on how you view the app's environment. I'm a lawyer, so people tend to bring me problems. And I'm encountering a number of challenges, and some of them were touched on in the last session, around things like, you know, rights management and how you license them for this environment. There are issues around user experience. Piracy is something that no one has really touched on, but it is becoming an issue. If people act as, you know, become imposters or pass themselves off and use your brand, how your brand can be affected in this environment. One of the someone gave a very good slide presentation on lessons to be learned in this environment, and one was be careful about how your brand is presented in this environment. The three of you closest to me come from established industries and established businesses that presumably you're keen to protect. So to what extent is this apps environment not only an opportunity but also a potential threat? And how are you dealing with that potential threat? What are the things that worry you about this environment? Let's start with you, Hemant.
So that's a very valid and a tough question, actually, to deal with indemnities and liabilities here. When you're dealing with traditional forms of content like games and so on, they typically tend to come from established game publishers, so it's relatively easier. But when you open up an environment to just about anyone to go and publish an app, the risk level goes up for sure. And as Vodafone's role in the ecosystem is more about a distribution element, you know, somebody touched the previous panel, there was a discussion of a little bit on how the liabilities and the indemnities flow back. And that's predominantly the model that, you know, as a distribution partner, we'll have to look at to say, since we're not moderating the content, essentially, except in terms of adult content verifications and so on, but otherwise, it's not really a moderated environment, so the app developer has to take the liability and indemnify a distribution partner, and the app developer is responsible for going and securing the rights. That's a way to do it in terms of the indemnities and liabilities issue, or the rights issues. But as an operator, what you're also worried about in these scenarios is virus situations. And piracy as well, to some extent, but also...
Sorry, did you say virus situations?
Correct,
so,
because...
Right, so contamination of the device.
Or malware in the code. I mean, remember, we can't be moderating and knowing each and every element of every developer's code. So that is obviously one big risk factor which we have to deal with. There are no known cases as of today. There were some cases which did happen, you know, a few years back, but in the latest last few years, there haven't been anything major on it. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. So there's some element of obviously QA and testing which we need to handle, but also about you know, most of these virus situations or malware situations would end up with some form of billing, and therefore being in the operator space, that's one element where you have to keep watch on.
And so clearly all these activities around monitoring and managing and evaluating risk have a price tag attached to them because they have an operational cost. Is the opportunity worth that cost and investment and risk?
Well, I would say yes, because the opportunity here is to provide the consumer the content that they need. So it's about consumer experience. And if we as an operator cannot provide that, the consumer will very well go away to another operator. So it's about...
So this is almost a defensive strategy for you to hold on to what you have in terms of your relationship with consumers and
Well, to be honest, I don't think many consumers today go and buy handsets or smartphones simply because it has a certain amount of content on it. They have, because I mean, an app store with 50,000 or 100,000 apps, no consumer will be able to tell you exactly what content is in the handset. So it's predominantly about the possibility of going and discovering content that they presume is going to be there. And the typical purchase decisions today about handsets still happen to be about form factors. And and the number of apps which are available on that platform is a relatively new phenomena. Once they go in and they start buying the apps, that's where the discovery starts to happen. And the key aspect there is how do they find the app that they want. Now, in terms of going back to your question, though, why we as an operator would want to do it, I mean, if it's a question of them finding the right content. And if we are able to help them find the right content, that's a value add.
So you feel the operator can play a valuable role in terms of content discovery
Correct.
and navigation.
Correct.
Ingrid, can I chime in for a
Sure.
Hello? Okay. I think this is very similar to the way the record industries handled stuff like Napster and other stuff, where it was so defensive that they effectively sued them out of existence. And the result was massive piracy, total loss of control, and now iTunes monopoly. And so I think that today, sure, there's valid concerns around piracy and there's risks and all this stuff, but the cat's out of the bag. Consumers like smartphones, they like tablets, there's no going back. And so I think the question is, how do we manage it? I think it's not a black or white question of, is it worth the risk? Because you know what? The consumers are going to do it anyway. We either provide them with a legal, structured way to do it, or they're going to take it.
And Sonnia, how do you respond to what Michael's talking about? Because obviously Disney content sits at the heart of the business. Is this environment, does it present a threat to you, an opportunity? How do you?
It's very much an opportunity, and here's why. For Disney, it's about staying relevant to the consumer, and as our consumers' behavior changes, we need to be there.
Embrace it.
And so it is a way for us to keep in touch with our consumers. I think the value of the space is that because you have a more intimate relationship with the consumer, we actually get a better understanding, which in turn allows us to create better product. And that's really important for us. I think what we're seeing also in terms of potential cannibalization of, let's say, physical versus digital. What we're seeing, if I take our books business as an example, we've published books in the digital space that may not actually have been in circulation in the physical space for some time. They were kind of put effectively in a moratorium. We've brought them back out just in digital format, and we've found that we've been able to reach a whole new audience, and the uptake has been phenomenal. So for us, we see it as a way of really staying in touch with the consumer and giving them what they want.
Your Toy Story app is incredible on the iPad. I mean, it's totally immersive. There's a Toy Story iPad app that is fantastic for kids, and maybe they wouldn't care as much about the book, but the app is interactive, and Woody's talking to you, and it's
is that a free app or a paid app? That's a paid app.
I believe that's a paid app.
It is a paid app. We had initially released it as free in the beginning, and that was part of our overall campaign for Toy Story. But this media basically allows us to go into multiple layers and add to make it a much more interactive experience, to your point.
I'm sort of hearing two messages from what you're saying. And on the one hand, it's about greater engagement and immersion and promotion and driving things back to the traditional properties, if you like. But I'm also hearing revenues. So do you view this as a revenue opportunity as well? Which
Absolutely.
Right.
It is definitely a revenue opportunity.
And not a cannibalizing one.
No, not a cannibalizing one. I think, the company overall knows that this digital component is where consumers will migrate over time, and we need to be there. And so, I'd say we're pretty much at the kind of learning stage as we engage in this space, and we put out apps and we can observe and see what's happening, what our consumers are feeding back to us.
And John, how does this resonate with you from a Sky perspective?
Well, I suppose just chiming in with your point, there are two things. One is about engagement. The second thing is about being ready for future platforms. So, to deal with the second, 2 years ago, an app was a kind of slightly nebulous concept, and even a year ago, the idea of tablets being quite so dominant already was kind of being laughed at, really. So I think we've got to be ready in how we're producing our content to next year be in a whole different area of connected screens. So I think what we're looking at is how we can from a news perspective, how we can create the kind of news on all platforms that people expect, but optimizing them for all of those platforms in a way that isn't too manpower intensive, but is actually saying, there are different expectations on a red button service to an iPad to an iPhone. When we look at the iPhone, what's very interesting about it is the engagement levels are incredibly high. They're not only high on video, which is a much higher engagement than online, but just in terms of pages viewed, I mean, it's essentially there are kind of it's a third fewer people using it every week, but they're viewing about as many pages as so a third of the total web uniques, but they're viewing as many pages as those web users.
So is it fair to say that you don't view this as undermining existing platforms or channels, but instead complementing them?
Because actually I think mobile, is keys in brilliantly with the brand values of Sky News. Sky News is about being first. It's about being connected to what you care about, and actually those are the things you really value on mobile devices. You want to know what's happening, where you are right now, and I think for us it's a massive opportunity, because if you think about it, a lot of particularly newspapers, they issue their news once a day, and so there are real opportunities there for us.
So Michael touched on business models in his slides, and how new business models are emerging very quickly, and John, you've touched on the fact that everything's changing very quickly. So I think for this audience it's interesting to sort of understand who are the key players in the value chain, if you like, at the moment. So who do you identify from your respective perspectives as really the key parties you need to be engaging with? And also, are there certain participants in the value chain that you see are becoming disintermediated or are at risk at the moment of falling outside of the value chain? Any thoughts on that? Anyone?
Can you define value chain, like specifically?
Well, unfortunately not, and I think that's part of the question, because as we all know, that those of us who come from a traditional media environment, there was a very clear and established value chain, and you had the production, and it was licensed and theatrical and whatever. Now it's kind of exploded and very fragmented. So who's really setting the agenda? Sure,
I'll take a crack at it. So you have the platform, the operating system. So Nokia, Apple, Google, iPhone, and soon Microsoft. That's really it. I mean, there's others, but those are the ones you care about. The carriers, like Vodafone, are doing everything they can to not be a dumb pipe. So they want to have value-add services. They don't want to just charge you for your data and your phone usage. So it's sort of a complex ecosystem, because you can go for Android, for example, you can build an app and you can go and submit it to Google and be done. And you can still get that on a Vodafone-connected Android device. Or you can submit it to Vodafone's App Store and be done. Or you can put it in both places. So there's sort of two gatekeepers. Vodafone offers certain benefits. I don't know if you guys are doing carrier billing, but if not, I'm sure you will soon, and also placement. Google offers benefits like discovery and other things. So you have the operating systems and you have the carriers. There's other distributors, like in music, there's the Orchard and IOTA and people like that. And there's similar things in TV and film. But it's really about what operating system do you want to develop for? And then are you going to work with the carriers on distribution? That's really the lay of the land.
So how do you decide?
You have to look at, but you have to, so for us as a content provider, we have to look at all the options and basically assess, which ones we want to place our bets on, because we can't do everything, but we want to do as much as possible. So it's about identifying which channels will allow our consumers to kind of get the content that they want kind of anywhere, anyhow.
And so do you evaluate that based on, first of all, identifying who you're trying to get to, and then looking at what handsets they're going to be using or tablets they're likely to use and operating systems?
So we'll definitely look at kind of the platforms that are out there. So of course, you have the ones that's already been mentioned, with Apple being a significant player, Google is a player. The network operators have their own platforms, which are also very important, especially because they have the billing relationship. So we definitely look at those and then say, okay, from there, which are the ones that we can, from a production standpoint, also be able to produce really interesting content that we think is interesting for the consumer and actually get it out there in an economical manner. So that definitely plays into it. I think one of the other things, though, that I wanted to raise is that in terms of kind of the new value chain, or one of the things that I think we saw in the dealing with the operators, is kind of this whole idea of an intermediary aggregators that could work on behalf of content providers. I think with the way some of the stores are structured today, with iTunes, Android, you don't actually need that intermediary necessarily. You can actually go straight through. And also from a distribution standpoint, you can actually flip on a switch and make your app go globally, whereas before it was not necessarily like that. So with Ovi as well, it's that way. With with iTunes, it's that way. So there are some efficiencies, I think, in just the purely operational standpoint that we're seeing being in this space.
I also think it heavily depends on your demographic. If you want to reach, like, Ovi's in 190 countries. No one has that scale. iPhone's in about 90 countries. I think Android is now in 40 or 50. So it depends on your demographic and your goals. If you're going to make an app play, the two ones the most compelling in North America are iPhone and Android. If you're going to make an app play worldwide, BlackBerry's interesting from a numbers point of view, but BlackBerry users don't really use apps at the same way that iPhone, Android, and Nokia users do.
I mean, it was interesting looking at Michael's presentation with those other tablets. I read last week that Next, the clothing store, is launching its own tablet. I mean, there's a kind of, it's slightly crazy how many there are out there.
Well, the Indian government's in the business.
Well, exactly. So I think it will be a while before that consolidates into something that we can grapple with. At the moment, it's clearly, as Michael said, it's iPad and it's Android. A couple of years down the line or a year down the line. So it's that uncertainty again. I think you have to, it's not insignificant, the cost of developing these things. So you've got to think carefully.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That there's a price tag attached to engaging with every different environment and so on. I'm conscious we're running out of time, and I have a couple of more questions I want to come back to in a moment. But let's just open it up to Q&A at this point, and then we'll bring it back to right. Lots of hands up. One over here. Could we get a microphone over here, please? And maybe some light.
It's coming.
Hello, I'm Chiara Sottocorona of Il Corriere della Sera, Italy. My question is, we know how many books is necessary to sell to have a bestseller. We know how many viewers are necessary to make a film of success. What's the number for the apps to have a successfully apps? What's the audience? And please, each one can give the name of your most successful application for Vodafone, for Disney. Each one, what's your more successful application and why it's a successful? Okay.
Great question, thank you. Who wants to have a go?
I'm gonna frustrate you with my answer. There's no standard or good metrics yet, I think, to measure success. If you're making money, you're successful. There's no, like, if you get 50,000 downloads, now your app's in the clear. Those metrics haven't been defined yet because it's so early in the market. Apps have really only been popular for a couple years. Our biggest app is an artist named Taylor Swift. She's the #1 artist pretty much in America right now, about 600,000 installs just in the US. Why is it successful? Well, anytime you take a celebrity of that level and you make content available on a mobile device, her fans want it, and they download it. Our #2 is Madonna. So these are both, they already have massive fan bases, but there's really the metrics that you're looking for, I don't think exist yet.
There was talk of making it into the top 100 apps in one of the earlier sessions. Is that a valid measure, do you think?
Sure. I mean, look, anytime your app is popular, you feel good. But if people, let's say you release a video app, and people are streaming $10,000 a day in video, and your app is free, you've got a massively successful app, but you're losing $10,000 a day. So if you can monetize users through advertising or the ways I mentioned, and you're doing great numbers, you're successful. But there's no benchmark yet that we've seen.
So following on that, I think it is very difficult to measure. Can everyone hear me now? Okay. It is quite difficult to measure in terms of success, in terms of actual volumes. I think one of the things that we're learning over time, and I think it appears for a lot of the successful developers on the App Store, is the importance of having an ecosystem. And what we mean by ecosystem is that many of the early players, and actually I should backtrack, there's actually no clear winner in the App Store. So there is no dominant player right now in the App Store, which is why it's such an exciting space, I think, for all of us sitting here, because we don't know who's actually going to take huge market share just yet. There are some players emerging, but it's far from defined. But with regards to the ecosystem, what we've seen with the more successful publishers is that they are able to create their own community from the purchasers of their apps. And they do it both through the technology available within the app, so they actually create a customer database. And then secondly, it's also through the quality of the app and how they get the consumer to engage with the app. So engagement is a really important metric. It's not just about the number of downloads, it's about the engagement, particularly, you know, if you're looking at revenue streams, whether it's advertising, you know, in-app purchases. In our case also, we look at just a premium model where you actually pay for an app as well. So we use a blend of all three. So that ecosystem is quite important. And what that does is it enables, of course, we work very closely with Apple to get the featuring, and everybody knows that that's very important for driving your downloads. But the other part and the value of the ecosystem is that by having that, you can actually boost your own app into the charts without necessarily requiring Apple's help. And so one of the companies we recently acquired, Panelists, has been very successful in doing this. And that's been a really important factor for their success to date. And it is something we see common among the more successful publishers.
I think from my point of view, one of the engagement and reach is both clearly important, you know, both from a platform and just a number of downloads point of view. But also it's quite important about how you can connect, you know, a single consumer sees your brand on many, many different connected screens, you know, whether it's a train station or, you know, on the Heathrow Express or wherever it is. And I think it's trying to work out how you can connect those experiences in some, you know, consistently and in a way that makes sense to them, that you're not presenting very different experiences or very, or really the wrong aspects of your brand, you know, making sure that a platform can, you know, that is reliable, it updates, is error or relatively error-free, is really important for a brand, you know. Those things matter. If your App Store reports are all about it crashes all the time, then that's a problem.
So I agree. I don't think there's a single metric which would define, you know, total number of downloads as the app success. I agree with Michael. If you're making money, you're successful. In terms of which apps are most popular, if we look at the different categories, you know, it also depends on the demographics. So it's difficult to pinpoint exactly one, which would be the most successful one. But in terms of categories, I would say applications which are for your local relevance still dominate in terms of downloads. So whether it's local news providers or things like, you know, Heathrow Express or Heathrow Travel Times or National Rail or so on in the UK, they still dominate a lot of downloads because that touches the consumer's need from a daily basis. Alternatively, apps which are having high amount of social engagement are also dominating with the younger demographics for sure. And you know, in terms of revenue generation, it's still games which dominates a lot of revenues.
Interesting. I think we had a question over here, gentleman at the front, and then two at the back.
Yes, my name is Lorenzo. I'm coming from Lisbon, Portugal. I'm developing an iPad application that involves charity donations. And the developers are trying to avoid as much as possible the hefty fee from Apple in this case.
That's a very easy question. They don't allow it. You cannot charge and take donations through in-app purchases. You also cannot charge for an app and say in the description that this money goes to a charity. And if you have a donation link inside your app, you have to click and it has to close the app and open Safari to take the donation. So don't worry about the fee because it's not allowed.
All right. So the solution is to go from the app to
the website, and the wording is very, very specific on what Apple will allow. If you want to shoot me an email, we've had a lot of experience with charities trying to build apps on that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And what's the reason?
I've asked them that. The reason is they don't want to have a tax liability for donations flowing through them. They don't want to have. They don't know if it's actually going to a nonprofit. They don't verify that it's a nonprofit. Right. They just want to steer clear of it.
Shame. Right. We had two questions at the back and then one last one at the front before we run out of time. So the answers are going to have to speed up a bit.
Hi, thanks.
We've got a microphone over there?
Yes. All the messages coming out of the platform owners are that they'd like people to make apps especially for them. So Apple want you to use their APIs, BlackBerry especially want you to use their special APIs. and Microsoft want you to make your app look like a Windows Phone app and nothing else. How does that tie into when you're thinking about the cost of developing these things? Do you want to make one app that runs and looks the same across all, or is there pressure to make it differently for each platform? Does that make sense?
The exclusivity question.
I don't want to...
Comments?
Yeah, sure. With mobile, so our experience right now, we're on iPhone and Android. And there are platforms out there that will let you make an app once, and it goes everywhere. Some say without any Apple approval. What they're really doing is offering either a mobile website that looks sort of like an app, but it's not really a true app, or it's a very simple app where you take a feed, like an RSS feed, and it's duplicated across multiple platforms. Over time, over the next 6 months, I think there'll be a number of services, including ours, where you can make an app once, and you can go to all those platforms and not have to worry yourself about plugging in with BlackBerry's APIs or Android's APIs. But every operating system wants you to take advantage of their own unique features of the operating system. All the carriers want you to take advantage of carrier billing if you're billing someone. So you kind of need to pick and choose depending on your goals and your demographic.
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, the myth that Java created a long time back, write once, run everywhere, is truly a myth. I mean, you will never get that for free. So when you're building on different platforms, you will have to deal with fragmentation. There is no way to avoid that, whether it's in terms of APIs or in terms of screen sizes or form factors or the different input formats that the different manufacturers will come up with. Even if let's say if you take two Symbian devices, one purely touch and one with touch and a full keypad, the way you deal with the different forms and so on will become different. So fragmentation is a known factor in the mobile devices, which is very difficult to avoid anyway. And there are, like Michael said, some platforms which are out there, and he's right, it'll either be a widget kind of an environment, which is like a web page as an icon in a device, or simple RSS feed, automated RSS feed generators, which would generate the versions for the different platforms. I would be very surprised if you get one single platform which would automatically handle all the different fragmentation issues across the different mobile devices.
But to pick up on the gentleman's question, which was that all these different platforms are trying to get you to developers to develop exclusively, or apps developed exclusively for their platforms. Are they going to struggle to get people to do that?
I'm not sure if exclusively was the question, but yeah, I mean, no, you shouldn't be exclusively on the iPhone. You shouldn't be exclusively on the Android. We are, I can't really talk too much about this yet, but we're about to enter and announce a relationship where you will get perks if you're exclusively on one platform for a few months, and that's fine. But to say just be on the iPhone or be on a Nokia because you'll get to use an API, it's crazy. I mean, your customers are everywhere.
It's almost a windowing model that you're alluding to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question, unless anyone else wanted to add anything, but I'm conscious of time. There was a question somewhere around there.
Hi, I just wanted to get back to the money thing. I don't know if this was at the beginning because I missed the first 5 minutes, but can we talk money, money, money? How much is it costing for these apps to be made? Like, just give me a general range. Utility apps, game apps. I'd love to know how much the Toy Story app was. Just to, you know, I'd like
we
to
want
know
details now.
I want to know the exact number. But it would be really good to get a range on like what people should be spending on or looking out for how much they're going to spend.
Would you like to know who's asking before you answer the question? Who are you?
What media are you with?
I am with the App Association. No, I'm Gavin from Jumpwire.
I can kind of give a range on it. And so I'll give you kind of the industry range. I can't tell you actually how much we spent for the Toy Story app, unfortunately. But
it was a good try.
Yeah, but I like the question. But I can tell you, depending on what you're doing, so it's going to be one of these nebulous answers, which I do apologize, but depending on what your objective is, so whether it's a marketing app, you want to actually make it as a commercial app, you know, i.e. you want to make a lot of money off of this, and depending on which segment of the apps you're actually going into, whether it's a book or a game or a utility app, your prices are all going to vary. I've heard prices kind of ranging anywhere from as low as $15,000 going all the way up to close to $1 million. And the close to the $1 million, to be fair, is a really, I mean, those are kind of like your FIFAs, your Need for Speed type games that are appearing on the iPad and the iPhone. So it's a huge range. But I think So again, it depends on the objectives of what you want to do. But regardless, the app has to be really engaging, because the consumers are really fickle on the store. You know, they know what they want. If they're not getting it, they're going to, you know, delete your app off their device, and then they'll go look for something else. So the consumer engagement is really, really important.
I mean, it does vary massively, absolutely massively, whether it's an iPhone, iPad, and I can't give specific numbers for Sky, but you know, I think in some iPad apps, actually what you're building is not that far off a website, you know, in the sense of the scale of the ambition. So in a way, you know, with some iPhone apps, it's, you know, they can be quite pleasing and heavily used by being quite simple, but I think you know, I think where things look less like websites, the engagement, you know, not duplicating either the process of those websites, the engagement is greater. But obviously, creating those things is, you know, can be akin to the costs of building a website. I can give
specific numbers.
Ooh.
He'll be the most popular person, I think.
And I don't work for a public company, so
Tune
I
in,
can
everyone.
say whatever I want. In our space, we're a platform. The main difference between that is we're not an agency where you come and say, this is what I want, and they say, this is how much it'll cost, it'll take 6 months, et cetera. And there's other platforms out there. The cheapest I've seen is free, but you get what you pay for. The cheapest app you can build on Mobile Roadie is about 1,200 euros, so it's not going to break the bank. But you're not going to get a Toy Story iPad app for 1,200 euros. If you want to create a really great content experience, I think a platform is the way to go. You're going to save a lot of money. You don't need to hire a developer. You don't need to hire a designer. If you want to create a game, if you want to create Toy Story, if you want to create Linkin Park's 8-Bit Rebellion video game, as an example, it's going to cost you money. And the cheapest agencies that I've seen maybe start at 5,000, 6,000, but you really get what you pay for. To get a decent app that's not just content out there, in my opinion, could range anywhere from 10 to 15,000 to close to $1 million. Linkin Park, the 8-Bit Rebellion game, just to give you a benchmark, was about $750,000. So you can spend a lot, but you got to make sure that the return on investment is going to be there.
And then there's another level of complexity, which is the whole freemium model. So you can build an app that's engaging, but that's free. And then the way you make the money is through the in-app purchases. But of course, to do that requires kind of ongoing servicing for that as well. So there are different ways, I think, to cut your development costs for these apps.
I'm going to cut you off there, Gavin. I hope you got your numbers, because there's one gentleman over here who's been very patient. I want to make sure we get time for his question.
Hi, hi. Everyone hear me? I'm John Bessai with greenheroes.tv, which it's not a shameless plug, but you can look at it on your iPad. And I have been agonizing about app, like, you know, paying to build an app for the greenheroes.tv campaign. And I'm going to say that once I started using the iPad, I realized when I was looking at how the web channel had been developed was that, of course, I always was planning that people could use it on the iPad, and I wanted to make sure that the videos would play and it would be interactive like a website. And I guess my question really is it just, I know that there's revenue models around apps, but what about just a kind of mobile web strategy? And in the end, are apps really kind of a fad? I mean, I'm just wondering, like, if it's just on the road to what people actually want and what they want to do. If you could just comment on the idea that we really should be looking at how we develop our web properties so that they're excellent, and maybe the app thing is just really is a bit of a diversion. But I don't want to go too far with that, because I know that the iPad is a new kind of a platform. But I'm just wondering about just the cautionary tales around going too far down the road of worrying about apps when web development may be the answer.
Could I build on that question before you answer it, if I may? Because part of this session was intended to be about crystal ball gazing and what the future holds. So, very valid question, is this whole app thing a fad? But also, given that we're at a media conference and entertainment and so on, when we talk about apps in this arena, we tend to think of it in terms of an entertainment platform. But Michael, you talked about the Indian government investing in tablets and investing in education. In my world, I've got people like banks coming to talk to me about how they engage with this media. So question, is the apps thing a fad, but also what's it about? Is it about more than entertainment? Is that the tip of the iceberg?
I think it's really important to understand...
In 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really important to understand why apps are so big. It's because of the user experience. The day that the mobile web gets as good or even as close to good as an app is the day that myself and many others will go into that space and forget apps. But users interact with apps, and it's off the charts compared to the mobile web. And so are apps a fad? I don't know. Is Microsoft Office a fad because Google Docs exist? Because that's really a good comparison, because Office is an app and Google Docs is cloud-based. I don't know the answer, but I can tell you for the next couple of years, I don't see anything paradigm shifting that's going to make the mobile web the same or even close to the same experience as apps, and consumers respond right now to apps.
And is it primarily about entertainment and the sorts of companies we have represented on this podium, or is it?
Not at all. In our Taylor Swift app, we moved $40,000 of iTunes music in the first week. And that was music that you could just go to iTunes and buy yourself. There was nothing special about buying it.
That's entertainment.
OK. There's other content areas, a magazine as an example. There's other areas in our system that we see significant digital sales.
OK, still entertainment. What about things like telehealth, teleeducation?
I think it's really big. It's a big
societal investment, things like that. Opportunities for emerging markets. Is that where the real growth is going to be, do you think? Or is it purely or primarily in entertainment?
I don't think it's primarily in entertainment. I'll put it this way. If you've got content, whether it's entertainment or any content, right now, an app is the best way to package and distribute that content where people are going to engage with it the most.
Okay.
In the future, that may change.
I mean, future gazing for me, I see app development. I mean, I think it's very easy to make predictions and then make it look really stupid. But the way I see it is that we should use them as a way of innovating, because I think we know that there's engagement, we know that there's a kind of massive interest there, so we should use them as a kind of way of taking a leap in various directions, whether it's the kind of content you're creating, how you're optimizing it for touch, how it might work, and then actually the web may end up looking more, as Michael says, looking more like that. You just have to look at the Twitter app on the iPad, look at the website redesign. It's actually quite a lot like the Twitter app for iPad. I think that's kind of the direction I think where things may increasingly go.
Sonnia?
No, I was just going to say in terms of the potential usage, I think it's pretty limitless. Today, entertainment is the big category. That's where the bulk of the revenue will come from on the store, but that's by no means where it's going to be in the future. Some of the initiatives we're looking at within our publishing group, look at kind of coursework, English coursework, which we do in China and some of the other territories. That's big, and we're looking at bringing that onto these devices and these platforms,
And of course, no one's talked about the location-based opportunity and what the world that opens.
That's right.
Very briefly, Hemant, anything to add to?
Yeah, I would say, like I was mentioning in the Vodafone shop page, and even from Vodafone Live, we see the local relevance apps having a large chunk of downloads as well, and they don't have to be entertainment apps. They are apps like National Railways or timetables of the local areas and so on, which are utilities, which people need.
Brilliant. All right. Well, we have run over time. Very last question. Now that we've got to the end of the session, who thinks that rich media apps can deliver significant revenues? Have we increased the numbers by the end of the session?
A little bit more.
Yeah, possibly.
Significant.
Yeah. Are you a lawyer by any chance? Right. Well, could you please join me in thanking the panel in the traditional way? And before you leave, I promised Farhan that I would remind you all that there are now cocktails happening upstairs, so hopefully you'll be able to join us for those. Thank you.